So my name is Sarah, like the chatbot, as we've learned now. Great to hear that a chatbot carries that name. Yeah, really great to be here and discuss a really interesting topic. So we're going to talk about digital tools for inclusion and empowerment. So I wanted to follow on from something Michael said earlier from Whitecap. Social impact is a growing concern for the industry, and I must say that over the 3 years that I've been involved in this project on behalf of ESRC, so the Economic and Social Research Council, that has really been reflected in the conversations I've been having with you, anyone who has been part really of the AI for Services program, also Next Gen Professional and Financial Services. So it's really heartening to see that there's a real drive across the community to make a difference, so drive social impact, but also thinking of new ways to make the really vital area of professional and financial services accessible to all that need it. And I think that's been a really reoccurring topic, I think, in my conversations with you. So yeah, and really today I wanted to just discuss how we drive innovation while also thinking about those that you need to take with you to make access and make use of the great technologies and systems you are developing. So yeah, I've got really excellent panelists with me today to talk about driving inclusion and empowerment through digital tools. So really brief introduction. So we've got Amanda from Separate Space. Amanda is a lawyer and has developed a solution that is looking to transform the experience of divorce and separation. And the platform will support users across a range of practical, legal and emotional matters. So really interested to hear from Amanda. We've also got with us Alessandra. Hi, Alessandra, from Mind Foundry. So Mind Foundry is building a solution leading the way in motor insurance, and the project is helping elderly people being treated fairly when it comes to staying on the road safely and also accessing motor insurance. And then we have Manesh over there from Amplified Global, and together with partners, Manesh has been working on the project Acre, which is an AI platform looking to help organizations better tailor complex info to the communities they are serving. And I'm sure they will be able to explain much more about what they do. We do have a roving microphone in the audience, so hopefully we'll have time. Obviously, we have one less panel member, so hopefully we'll have time to take some questions from you. And yeah, hopefully we can also maintain the energy in the room. I know it's it's a final panel, and so hopefully you can stay with us. Brilliant. So just to kick us off, I'm going to go to the middle of the panel. Alessandra, could you talk a bit about your background of your project and what you've been working on, and how are you trying to empower users to work with digital tools?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I'm Alessandra Tosi. I'm a senior scientist at Mind Foundry. So I work on the technical side of things, like developing algorithms and working on artificial intelligence solutions. At Mind Foundry, we develop solutions in various sectors. What I will talk about today is our work in insurance, particularly motor insurance, but we also focus in infrastructure and in defense. So applications that actually direct impact the society and parts of the society. And we do focus on developing algorithms in a responsible way. So I'm also particularly passionate about like understanding what an algorithm is doing and what the artificial intelligence that is then deployed in a solution is doing. And this can be done by providing some explainability to the solution, et cetera, et cetera. And I do believe that this also helps the users to trust those solutions if they have better understanding rather than just taking for granted what they get. So the work we've done with motor insurance with this UKRI project that I want to talk to you today is in the context of supporting elderly drivers. You know that the population is aging worldwide, and UK is no exception. Just as of today, there are 6 million people aged 70 and over who hold a full driver license. so many drivers of the age of 70 and over, but yet motor insurance products are not tailored for this category of people, so insurance gets really expensive with age, and some insurers even don't insure elderly. So this is a big problem because many elderly people rely on their car, their vehicle, for to go to a doctor appointment or to socialize, and this is really impacting their independence and health sometimes. So it's a really big problem. But on the other side, we all want secure roads, and insurers just see elderly driver as a higher risk. What's actually happening is that whether some elderly driver might be a higher risk when they are on the road, many more are just very experienced drivers who don't pose a risk. So today's technologies allow the insurer and the user to understand driving behaviors through telematics technology. Basically, you fit your cars with devices, and you can get those data, analyze them, and there are software techniques, artificial intelligence algorithms that can help link those data with the driving risk. So how can we help insurers to keep more drivers on the road, but to keep safe drivers on the road, and help those drivers who might become less safe drivers to understand their driving behavior is changing, and so to either take an action, improve or take a course, or just maybe change their driving habits to be more secure, maybe avoiding, motorways if they don't feel more secure on those, et cetera, just to suggest some examples. So these are the type of application we've been working on in this project, and the context. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alessandra. So Amanda, I wanted to ask you a bit about your platform. So obviously divorce is a very sensitive and vulnerable time for people. So how are you getting users to navigate that emotional side of things, but also actually getting the support they need?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Amanda. As Sarah said, I'm a divorce lawyer by background, and I spent most of my legal career at one of the leading family law firms in London, helping people sort out their finances, their arrangements for their kids following a separation. I now lead Separate Space, as Sarah said, which is an online platform to support people through divorce, providing expert financial, legal, emotional, and practical support. And in terms of getting people involved and getting people using the product, it's really important. The idea of Separate Space came to me when people in my personal life started getting divorced. And the idea that they can pick up the phone and have access to a lawyer all the way through the process, a process that for most people takes more than 12 months, is completely unrealistic. And so if divorce has touched you or touched someone that is close to you, you will know it is incredibly stressful. It impacts every aspect of your life. So that's where you're living, your time with your kids, how much money you've got in the bank, where you can go and do your grocery shop that week, your money in retirement, physical health, mental health, ability to engage at work. And this is not just a problem it's not a small-scale problem. So I mentioned sort of people in my personal life, but if we look at the stats, there are 100,000 couples going through divorce each year in England and Wales alone, so 200,000 people. Of that group of people, only 40% of them are accessing the courts to formalize their financial arrangements. And I'm not talking about going in front of a judge and asking a judge to impose an outcome on you as a separating couple. I'm talking about doing a deal outside of court and then formalizing it, sending it, kind of the paperwork to court, and getting it made into a binding agreement. So that 60% that are not accessing the courts at all are either doing an arrangement between the two of them, or worse yet, not coming to a settlement at all. And we know that if people get some legal input at some point, it doesn't need to be kind of that lawyer at the end of the phone the whole way, but some legal input, they are far more likely to get to an agreement on the money that is fair, that includes pensions, and that ends up being formalized. by the courts. So what we're doing we see as really important, and the accessibility point is key, because there's no point having this if people can't access it. And clearly the way that legal services are traditionally delivered is not accessible in this space. And so we know from the research, wider research, and from our smaller scale research at Separate Space, that actually a bit of input at the right time can really move the dial for people. And so accessibility is at the core of what we're doing.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. I mean, 40%, that's really sobering. Only 40% are accessing services. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you both for those perspectives. So, Manesh, I want to turn to you, because you have quite a personal story behind what you're doing at Amplified. So, are you happy to expand?
Yeah, no, totally. Hello, hope you're well. My name's Min. I'm the founder of Amplified Global. I founded in 2017. Quick show of hands, a bit of audience participation. If you think back to the last financial product you bought, credit card, loan, account, how many of you read the terms and conditions? So look around. Oh, there's one here. Okay, so terms and conditions are really important because they are there to safeguard not only the firm, but critically the consumer. We have a legislation in the UK called the Consumer Rights Act, and that is your safeguard for when you buy a product or a service. And yet, you know, if I was to ask you, well, why didn't you read your T's and C's? You will probably say, well, it was too long, it's full of legalese, I don't understand it. And you can stream it all off, and that is all correct. Because essentially, terms and conditions are written by lawyers to be read by lawyers. But the legal position, and this has been the legal position in the UK for donkey's years, is that the terms and conditions are there to give parity between the consumer and the firm. And the terms and conditions are there so that the consumer is able to make an informed decision. And remember that, informed decision. And in order for you to make an informed decision, you need to be able to understand it. Because that's the only way you can make an informed decision. Now, at the age of 31, I'm 50 this year, but at the age of 31, in 2006, I was diagnosed with multiple hidden disabilities. So in that one single moment, when I was part of an EU project, when the consultant listed off these reams of conditions I had, suddenly I've got a very good memory, and I can scan documents. I don't read all the words in a sentence. I look at letters and guess. And sometimes I've got a photographic memory, and I can bang, 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 and I can get the essence of what that information is. But yet, when I go out to buy a product or service, especially financial services, and a credit card, and you need money to survive, I'm expected to read streams of information, which I can't. And that's the problem I'm tackling, challenging the structure, the infrastructure, and challenging the status quo, significantly in financial services. Because if you think about it, why is it fair that you are given a document that you cannot understand, and yet you sign it, and this document there is for the life cycle? So think about it. Because if things go wrong, what will the bank go back to? The legal document you signed. But if you don't know anything about it, or you don't know what the mechanics were, your rights and responsibility, that's a problem. And that's a problem about empowerment, but the ability to make an informed decision. So the problem we're tackling is one that everybody recognises. It's a global problem, and it's one that's going right to the heart of the legal industry, which is really kind of tackling it and saying, well, hang on, why the hell is this fair if the other party cannot understand it, and yet you expect them to sign it and adhere to it? And in order for us to do that, we've got to go right down to the root cause of the issue, which is the language, and how information is constructed and then drafted, and secondly then presented. And crucially, this project, when we started back in 2022, enabled us to start to build the building blocks. We are an AI company. We are pushing the boundaries. We're quite unique because we work with regulators, predominantly the Financial Service Conduct Authority, the FCA, and as part of this project, we brought the Solicitors Regulation Authority in. Because everybody knows that if you present a piece of information that somebody doesn't understand, then how is that right and fair? And there is a small court case going on, if you haven't noticed it, around motor finance, which is sending earthquake through the financial services. And that will have significant ramification across other credit products. So when we're kind of looking at the problem that we're trying to solve, it's massive, it's challenging, but actually at the middle of it is the consumer. And the ability for that consumer to make an informed decision. And that is all about empowering that individual to make the right decision at that moment and in that time.
Yeah, thank you, Minesh. And actually that leads nicely into the next part of the discussions, which was about design of tools. So how do you drive that engagement with the consumer, with the end user? And how do you make those tools accessible? As well as how do you tackle privacy concerns, trust issues around using certain services as well and tools. So Amanda, just coming back to your topic and the service you're providing. So as you said, a lot of people may not see themselves as users of legal services, surprisingly, even though, as Stephen said at the beginning and framing the whole day, everyone has to be in touch with, at some point, with legal services, accountancy, professional, as well as financial services, of course. But how do you overcome any barriers to using those services? How do you build the trust?
Yeah, I think it's really key, and that point about people not even recognizing that there is a legal problem applies across the board, all sorts of issues in people's lives. When I talk about legal tech to lawyers, they're normally somewhere between paranoid and panicked. But actually, if we have a society that is more empowered, recognizing that there is a legal issue, you never know, there might actually be more work for lawyers because there are all of these issues that are not being served and people not having access to support. But in relation to what we're doing at Separate Space, I know when we talk about accessible digital products, often we're talking about people getting them in their hands, understanding them, navigating them, interacting with them. In relation to divorce and access to support, just to take a step back, and set the scene. Imagine your marriage is ending, could have been slow burn, could have been coming for a while, could be completely out of the blue. You work shifts, if you don't turn up to work, you don't get paid. You've never consulted a lawyer at all in your life, you may never have met a lawyer. You are not eligible for legal aid, though you don't know that yet. Very few people in this jurisdiction are eligible for legal aid when it comes to divorce. You find a solicitor online and you realise that you're going to have to book an appointment, go and meet them, scrabble together the best part of 300 quid. You know that even if you go to that meeting, you're not going to have the cash to see that lawyer again. So that's accessibility in the sense of not just the cash to see a lawyer, but there's all of these other barriers that stop people accessing legal services. Now, I'm actually very pro-lawyer. I'm a lawyer to my core. However, if you contrast that scenario with someone, accessing information via a website on their sofa at 11 p.m. at night, that from that website they can get an understanding of the legal landscape. They can understand what they need to do next, have the tools to get it done. That does feel more accessible, and that's not just because of the cost. The cost is important. We mustn't forget about that. At Separate Space, we did some research last year. We surveyed over 500 people in England and Wales who had experience of divorce in the last 12 months. And 29% of the women who responded said they had no budget whatsoever, zero, to pay for support through divorce. That figure for male participants was 15%. So interesting, perhaps not surprising, that twice as many women do not have the cash to get legal support or support at all. So that may not be a lawyer, it could be a financial planner, it could be a therapist, it could be a divorce coach, but zero budget. So the cost is really important, but I think it's also good to think about accessibility more broadly. In relation to the digital product itself, we have been fortunate to work with someone that is excellent on inclusion and accessibility. Her name is Charlie Fountain, Fountain with an E, and the reason I say that is because if you are interested in building inclusive, accessible products, she posts a lot on LinkedIn and just does some interesting nuggets, so find her on there. So that's Charlie Fountain. And she has worked collaboratively with us so that accessibility is really underpinning the whole project. So that a lot of what you were saying, Min, resonates, because it's about what language we're using, how are we making the user journey as simple as possible, how are we making sure that it's easy to navigate and people feel kind of seen by it. So when we've been getting user feedback, Charlie's been really fundamental in helping us think about how we get that feedback, where we're doing surveys, what language are you using so that people want to give us that feedback, where there's user interviews, how are they done in a really sensitive way so that we're getting a diversity of voices feeding back into the product. So we're not perfect, we've got a long way to go, but I think recognizing the challenges is part way to finding the solution.
And I think to add to that, trust. If you can gain the trust of who the end user is, you're pretty much halfway there, and that is super, super important. In 2022, we were in the regulated sandbox for the in the FCA in financial services, and we were asked to go in by the regulator, and we looked at a number of legal documents, and we were asked to change them, changing the tone, changing the layout, and to an extent, we were asked to make it non-compliant. It was non-compliant because the ordering was changed. But the crucial thing was, by changing the tone, doing little simple things made a massive difference. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, what that enabled, the main data that came out was trust. Mm-hmm. And this document was a debt document. And the challenge here was that when people are in debt, they're vulnerable. Obviously, they're vulnerable, but they want to bury their heads in the sand, either ignore it, feel shame, just do not want to engage with it. And the challenge here was, how can we get them to engage? And how can we get them to pick up the phone? And it's all about kind of changing the stance and changing the messaging to actually, rather than saying that you owe us money, it's more around as we're here to help. And what was an eye-opener for the regulator at the time was that actually by changing not only the ordering but also the tone, there was a longitudinal impact where the individual was able to pick the phone up and to act on it. And it all kind of goes back down to the trust, because as soon as somebody trusts, whether it's that product or service, they're more willing to do an action.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with you, Manesh, so when thinking about involving and engaging people in the tool you're developing, so have you got examples of what has worked?
Yeah, we do a lot of consumer research. We work with a lot of academics. We have the technology we're building is groundbreaking. It's really pushing the boundaries across multiple different spaces, not only AI but also blockchain, and infusing that into the current technology stack that we have. And what we're doing is we are changing the dynamics of how a contract is presented. And this is really kind of pushing the boundaries, because until you see it, it's too abstract. But actually, when you see it, it's like, oh, this is simple. This is what, I can see how this works. But fundamentally, even before we get to the point of kind of how we think about developing it, we've kind of got to start at the building blocks, and it's around the language. What does interest mean to you, or interest rate mean to you? So if I was going to ask 10 people in the audience, what does interest and interest rate mean to you? I'm pretty sure I would get at least 5 different kind of answers to a certain extent. Especially if I was to walk on the street from people from different segments of the population, we would get different answers. So it's about kind of understanding the perception of language. What does this mean to you? And in the context that you live in, and the impact that has on you. And then secondly, when we're kind of looking at the development side of how does this product evolve into a journey, being able to show that journey to multiple people is crucial, because I'm a founder with hidden disabilities, so I've got lived experience day in, day out. So depending how stressful my brain is, my brain plays tricks on my eyes. So I can see that I've got this piece of paper and I've highlighted it here, and I can look at it and I can see words moving on here. But because I memorized it, I know, I can point it, so I can kind of look at that. But, you know, so when I'm looking at information, personally, I'm bringing my lived experience to it, but kind of crucially, we're getting feedback from lots of different people who may use this technology, but also people who may not use it because they may have a different viewpoint as well. And then I think crucially, how are we building our technology? Because it's novel, because it's kind of pushing the boundaries, transparency is a core anchor for Amplified. Because what we're doing here is that we want to try and make, you know, a really boring, dull piece of document, which is your terms and conditions, engageable, and a living document which you would use throughout the life cycle of that product. But how do you do that in a way whereby, you know, the bank is going to have a risk profile of you? Because that's what they're being marked now by the regulator. They have to tick a compliance box now to say that you have understood this piece of information. New laws came in last year. And as some of you who probably bought products recently will have seen some changes. And that is only going to get tighter now from the lenders. So actually, how can you make a product here which is much more two-sided, two sides of a coin, the bank and the consumer, but there's a layer of transparency there, where the bank is looking at your risk data, because that's what they're being marked at by the examiner, i.e. the regulator, and that's their risk profile. But then also the consumer here, who actually, you know, do I need to know when my promotional rate's going to end? Do I need to know the impact if the interest rate moves by half a point? Or how much is that going to knock on to my £10,000 debt? And what's the impact of that? So having transparency about the data that's being used or the data that's being generated, but also how it's being used is kind of really crucial. And that is really kind of central to how we kind of developing it, because we're kind of moving into a very, you know, a new world. I know Trump's come in and he's kind of sideswept a lot of the laws, or trying to do that. But certainly in Europe, privacy, GDPR, is still central. And firms have to abide by it, and that is getting tighter and tighter. So therefore, kind of how can we make a solution here whereby the consumer knows the risk? They know that they're being profiled, because everybody's profiled. As soon as you open your Lloyds app, you are profiled. You might not know that, but Lloyds are profiling you. So how do you know as a consumer that you are being profiled? And then what is the data that's being gathered? And then what is it in my right? Because it is your right, it's your data. And you do have a legal right to that piece of information. So it's really kind of important to have consumers, end users, but as well as other key stakeholders involved in that process.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Manish. I think you have to hold that thought as well, because I saw Samrit has a question, but we'll get to that in a moment. Alessandra, I just wanted, because you're sitting more on the tech development side with my Foundry. How did, from your experience on this project, but also previous insurance projects you've been involved in, how did you ensure you bring users into the process when designing your tool in the technical aspects of that?
That's really important, to bring the user. That's really important. So one common denominators I've seen in all these applications is to gain the trust of the users, to provide them language and an understanding of the technology and even of the, you know, the things that we want to achieve. And that's very important. So those user research and those questions that you want to ask at the beginning, including ethical questions about, you know, data privacy, data usage, and impact of deploying a certain solution are so important to be done at the beginning of the development, and all parties need to be involved in those solutions, the designers, the technical developers, the users, anyone, because it's by starting a conversation at the beginning that you're able to build a really transparent and inclusive product, if you want to do so, obviously. And also, I think it's very important to understand that user, you might have to tailor your product to different audiences and ask those questions at the beginning. In the specific example of motor insurance, users can be, for example, different age groups. That's what we were looking at, but even they can be diverse in other aspects. And with these differences, you need to provide also ways of using the products differently, and also ways to uncover maybe information that can impact users in different ways, or can help users to achieve what they want to achieve. Maybe a younger driver, a new driver, is very interested in their insurance product to be a bit cheaper. Maybe an elderly driver is, of course, he wants to access insurance, but is interested in driving safely. Maybe they have other goals when they buy these insurance products. So you have to try to speak to the final user and to also make them understand how they can achieve what they want to achieve, being this, driving more safely, et cetera, et cetera. And also, I'm a big believer in educating users about how they can use products to do better. So, there's some telematics insurance product with all the available data that they can provide. They can help you being a better driver, so making the roads more secure for everyone. And maybe we are not aware of that. Maybe there's some driving behavior we are not aware of. And if we were told, we might maybe change those behavior. Maybe actually was speeding a bit too often this month, or things like that. Or maybe you notice through your risk profile, your data, that actually when I drive at night, or when I drive against the sun in that road, I don't drive so well. So maybe you're aware of those things, and you just pay more attention in those specific moments, because the product, the data, the telematics data that are gathered, they tell you that. And I think this is important to provide this to the user.
That's brilliant. Thank you all. So some really broad lessons as well around education and transparency and driving trust through different ways, including gamification as well, and bringing them, getting the feedback from the users as well. So now I'll keep my last few questions to myself for now, but wanted to see if there's audience questions. I saw Zamaret, you caught my eye. Question. You want to hold your hand up, Zamaret, so people know. Yeah, there's a microphone around. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. I nearly forgot it's freezing here. It was fascinating. So I'm Zamaret Rubin of Oxford Brookes University, and I call it the TIPS Accelerator. So I see the problem, I don't know if it's a question, more of an observation. The problem starts with the understanding or the symmetry between the consumers and the service providers. So the problem starts with the understanding the value of information that the consumers are less likely to have. So they don't really appreciate the value of information, the value of data. So I can definitely think about me in your case, and Alessandra, your case as well. So for insurance, it could be old people or any discriminated group of people, young drivers. We all know the issue of the cost of insurance for young drivers. But then even the telematics, when you collect the data, you as an individual, you don't really appreciate the value of data that you share. So that is an unbalance. And in your case, the issue starts, I think, in an earlier step where the consumers do not really know they can do better if they really understood the information of terms and conditions, because it's very similar to cookies that we all tick the box for, terms and conditions, just give me the service, because you understand the value of the service you get, but you don't read the terms and conditions. So just interested in your opinion about the value of information, the value of data for the consumer, just to make it more balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's very true. Data have a value, and yes, most of the time users don't understand the value of this data. Through market research, unsurprisingly, a segment of the elderly population was less familiar with actually the type of data that are collected and how they can translate into value. Some of them are familiar with technology, but with age, we still see a gap between the younger user who seem to understand more the value in the data and have an understanding that maybe your GPS location can get detected very easily, even from your phone or from the car or wherever. So yes, there is a discrepancy, but I do believe that with education, it's possible, even in an easy way with a dashboard and a readable diagram, or maybe messaging that is familiar to the user group, like simple words and explanation, that we can convey the value of this data. And also give a little bit of control over the data to the user as well, because the fact that they are not aware, most of users of any product, they're not aware of what's collected, that is their data, I think is a big problem. It's a big problem because it's like data is nowadays a currency, we can say, and you need to know what type of data can be collected. And even if those data are not private data, but those data are still collected, maybe anonymized and used, and it's very important that those who develop products are very transparent in explaining which data and how things are used. Yes. This will help inclusion as well, because the more we know, the more we want to use those products also. So that's, I think, is a win-win even for those who develop products. I think an informed user is a better user.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Amaret. Are there any other questions from the room? Yeah, right there.
Thank you. A couple of questions and also just some wishes and asks from me for the panel, if you could take away on some of the work that you're doing. So around T's and C's, I think there's two areas for me. I think there's the developing the digital tools to support accessibility, but not leaving the real issue behind, which is the T's and C's document itself. And actually, if we work on that T's and C's document, that means it would be inclusive for a large percentage of the UK. But where accessibility issues can help is where we can develop tools that can overlay that. So some tools, for example, that summarise that T's and C's document, but actually the real issue is the T's and C's document itself. So it's probably an ask to Minesh in terms of the work that you were doing. And then secondly, if I could just put my second one in, sorry, because you might want to link to this. Link to T's and C's, moving away from what seems to be the digital tools or the tools that mainstream financial services are looking to use in this space is and putting the liability back on the consumer in terms of ticking a box to say that I understand that. And there's some research recently by a company called Plain Numbers that looked at, does the customer say they understand it versus does the customer truly understand it when you ask them to play back what that document means. And I think we just need to consider both of those as well.
Okay, yeah. So when we think about T's and C's, there's a structure of terms and conditions, because terms and conditions are a legal contract. And they're made up of different regulations. So if we take the credit card, it's not just consumer duty regulation. It needs to include payment regulation, it needs to include GDPR regulation, and other regulations as well. So at the moment, a lot of documents, financial documents, are regulated by prescription, i.e. you need to have X, Y, and Z in, or you need to have it in this order. And you need to have it in this terminology. You've got to have it in. There's no way out. Now, you've got regulation, but sitting underneath regulation is legislation. So that is really crucial, because that's the driving part. That's the real part, because regulation sits on top of it. So what we're looking at T's and C's is actually, you know, you've got underpinning legislation, Consumer Rights Act. So within the Consumer Rights Act, you've got the Consumer Credit Act. The Consumer Credit Act has 33 prescribed clauses. So these are 33 clauses that all credit products have to have. Doesn't matter whether, you know, whether it's loans, credit card, overdraft. They all got to have these 33 clauses. Now, the reality is you could just have one standard clause across each of these 33 clauses, which is part of their legislation, and that could then be top and tailed per credit contract. So if you think about Lloyds, you've got Lloyds, MBNA, Halifax, Bank of Scotland, are just 4 of their brands. Think about the credit cards. Each of those have got credit card, yet they will have different versions of that T's and C's. So most people will have more than one credit product, generally from that same bank. So what we now have is an opportunity is to change the construct of T's and C's. Because the regulation will require bits of it's certain information that needs to be in the document, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily tell you how you do it. And as long as you say the main bits, you can construct it how you want. So, you know, we are tackling the whole structural problem around terms and conditions. We're based in Allen Novi Sherman. It's one of the largest law firms. We've been working with the regulators. And we are tackling it. We are working with the FCA in developing a whole new way of presenting terms and conditions in a whole new layered way, which no one else has ever seen. And this is where information is 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional, moves up and down, left and right. And this is an always-on contract. But information is surfaced where you have agentic agents, AI agents helping you. And as you move throughout the life cycle of that product, and where you are, because when you go to get a credit card product, you are not going to be thinking about how am I going to make a complaint? Not at the onboarding. You may think later down the line. So that piece of information isn't necessarily relevant at the start, where some later down the line, later on, you may think, actually, I want to make a complaint. Where do I surface that piece of information? So, you know, we are tackling the root cause of the issue, because the root cause of the issue is the language, but also as part of the language is how is this constructed, and what's the layout, what's the design of it. And by doing it that way, what you can then do is start to build up a new way of developing a contract. And the reason why we've tackled credit card is because that's the most complex financial contract in financial services. Because if we solve the problem for that, you can transfer that to all the other different credit products. And what we're actually doing is regulation is changing. So law will change next year. There's a thing called the Consumer Credit Act, which is going through Parliament at the moment, and that will be transitioned to the financial regulator. And that is the axis whereby the FCA will have greater control in terms of what regulation is required, but also from a legal powers as well. And that's really important to remember. And I think your second question, does that answer your first question in terms of that? Yeah, so your second question was around plain numbers. Now, plain numbers do a good job. For what they do a good job. You know, people say we're competitors, we're not. I don't see them as a competitor to us. We are an AI company. We are a technology company which looks at language, and we use AI to look at the risk and intelligibility, which no one else does. But the technology we're building is only part of the process. We don't control, you know, we're not saying we do everything. That's not our job. Because actually where the superpower where it really is, and I can talk about step change, in the sense that where the superpower is when you augment AI with a human brain. That is where you get real massive gains and significant gains, especially on legally driven documents. And, you know, AI can only do so much. We can look at risk in language, we can highlight it, we can help you simplify it. But the AI can't help you how you design it. You need a human brain to do that, or the layout of it. And that is really kind of important. You need another skill set. So actually, when you're looking at technology and you're looking at how do you solve a bigger issue around consumer understanding, you've got to kind of almost look at it as a toolbox of multiple tools that kind of work in unison for that. And like plain numbers do research. I think we do a lot of academic research, and that makes us very, very different to anybody else in the market. We work with academics, and we have empirical research. Empirical research is the most robust research you can have. And that's the reason why the regulators work with us. Because our research is not commercial research. And this puts us, creates a clear difference between our data. And what we do is we developed, and my colleague Sarah, Dr. Sarah Spang, who's our research lead, we've developed proprietary frameworks that we know no one else has done in terms of when we're looking at consumer understanding and actually looking at real understanding, because the industry looks at recall. Because if you show somebody to somebody and you ask them a question, all they're doing is going back to their memory and recalling it. That's where the industry looks at. But that's not true understanding. True understanding is actually, can you remember it, but can you now apply it to a context? And can you think about the impact this would have? And think about it a week later when your children are sick and your mental load is really heavy because you've got pressure at work. Can you recall that piece of information and the impact that can have then? That's called real consumer understanding research. And that's the research that we do with our empirical partners. So I think, just answering your question, the technology we're building is part of a toolkit. We can only do so much, and that's our expertise. But there are other tools out there and services, like plain numbers is consultancy training, and they do good stuff that can help as part of that process. But actually, when we're looking at the research side of it, I would say, and that we go way beyond the market does, and this is the reason why the regulators work with us.
Thank you so much, Min. Can we do one final statement from, do we have enough time? We're over time. But I just wanted to hear maybe a final statement from Amanda and Alessandra as well. Looking forward, what are the opportunities for the sector to really drive? So what can we get people to take away from this chat? And what can people do to drive inclusion in the sector? Do you have any perspectives?
Yeah, I think from a legal tech perspective, it's been quite interesting personally coming to the innovation space as a lawyer, because I have quite literally been trained to be risk averse. Meanwhile, I'm pitching against founders who are going to build the next unicorn. There's no challenge that's too big to overcome, and of course, I'm exaggerating, but there is a balance there. And the same approach comes, I think, when we're thinking about developing inclusive tools for access to justice, obviously the piece that I'm interested in. A lot of what you're saying, Min, in relation to consumer protection is key, really, really important. And we take it really seriously at Separate Space. The people we're serving, these decisions they're making now are likely to impact them for the rest of, perhaps not the rest of their lives, but certainly for years to come, and impact their children. It is serious that the consumer needs to understand what you are and what you are not. In terms of innovating, I think that as much clarity around the regulations and rules as possible is helpful. So what you're saying from a consumer perspective in terms of really understanding it, when you're giving terms and conditions in whatever form they are, the same really applies to the regulations. If you've got startups building innovative products in the access to justice space that are direct to consumer, they are unlikely to be well funded. The vast majority of funding goes to B2B products in legal tech. So are these B2C startups likely to have a pot of money to spend on lawyers to help them understand and interpret the regulations? No. And so I think clarity around the regulations is really important. There's also this extra layer that you need the people with legal background, professional services background to be in the room, to be around the table. They are going to be risk averse. They are not going to want to accidentally breach some rule that they hadn't quite understood. So I think real clarity there is important, and a supportive ecosystem helps. So at Separate Space, we've worked with SRA Innovate, we have worked with Law Tech UK, and that kind of ecosystem where there's a real encouragement, ideally funded encouragement, to help these startups make an impact. And in the access to justice space, there's real potential for combining expertise with tech to build this bridge, to help more people access the support they need. And so I'm hopeful, and I think that it's an exciting space to be in at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any final thoughts from you, Alessandra?
Yeah, my final thought is that I want to stress the importance of transparency in any technology that is built. To link what you said about the B2B and the B2C products. Sometimes what reaches the customer is not the direct problem, but it's a byproduct, something that uses some other technology, and so and so. If you want to link with the previous panel, there's now loads of Gen AI, agentic AI, LLMs technology out there that gets used, and then layers of product are built on the top of it before the final output is seen by the customer. And the lack of transparency in this type of product, I think, is really preventing users to use it correctly, understand it, and I think it's really important to build each step of your product in a transparent way, even when you use existing technology that you have not developed. So really stressing on that for inclusion, I think, is an important step.
Brilliant. Thank you, three of you. Thank you so much. Sorry that we are so short for time. Actually, I think we do have to close, don't we? But do continue the conversations, please, and you as well. Do keep asking questions from the panelists. And are we going into coffee break? Yeah. A small coffee break to get your refreshments upstairs. Back at 4 o'clock, please. And thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.